Hello Inner Wheel, and thank you so much for having us here. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you today at your Gala conference for 2024. The work that we've been doing most recently is concentrated on a condition called fetal growth restriction, or FGR. Fetal growth restriction is a serious complication of pregnancy in which the placenta doesn't work properly and so fails to deliver enough oxygen and nutrients to the developing baby. This means that the baby doesn't grow well in the womb. You can see on the slide two babies. Both of these babies were born at 37 weeks of gestation. The baby in blue is an average size, right on the 50th percentile for body weight, and the baby in the yellow cap was born with fetal growth restriction. He's at the 2nd percentile for growth charts, so he's born very small. Fetal growth restriction is associated with altered development of some of the major organs, including the heart, the lungs, and the brain. Now, when development becomes altered in utero of these major organs, we can also expect to see functional deficits after birth, and these persist into childhood. Now, our group is particularly interested in the brain and brain development. We know that FGR is linked to a spectrum of functional deficits. These span motor deficits, cognition and learning deficits, and also behavioural problems when children reach school age. In particular, we're going to talk to you a little bit about the functional deficit of poor memory in children who have FGR. And we know that this is derived from poor development of the hippocampus in utero. Hippocampal volume loss is one of the features in children with fetal growth restriction. I'm now going to hand over to Tegan White. Tegan submitted her PhD just this week, and her project has really provided the foundation for the project that we're going to do as part of this Inner Wheel grant.
Thank you, Suzie. Hi, I'm Tegan White, and as part of the final project in my PhD, we conducted a pilot study of fetal growth restricted lambs and investigated their learning and memory potential and also how that impacts on brain development. I was investigating the hippocampus, as this is a brain region that's really integral for learning and memory, and tried to see the full structural components of the hippocampus and how the neurons were impacted by fetal growth restriction. We saw that the neurons had reduced complexity, so these neurons had reduced branching and length, and that's really integral for how the neurons function and how that impacts on learning and memory. In our cohort of lambs we treated with umbilical cord blood stem cells, we were excited to see that the neuronal complexity was restored. So these neurons had increased branching and length, similar to that of control levels, so that we were able to reduce the impact of fetal growth restriction on the hippocampus and this really delicate neuron complexity and structure. In this cohort of lambs, we also tested their learning and memory. So we took all our lambs and put them in a maze to test to see if their learning and memory was impacted by fetal growth restriction. Excitingly, our lambs treated with umbilical cord blood stem cells saw an improvement in this learning and memory deficit. They had less errors and performed similarly to our control lambs in that maze task, being able to perform it at a similar level to controls. This final part of my PhD was following on from previous work you have funded here at Inner Wheel, where we've shown the protective potential of umbilical cord blood stem cells in improving brain development in a preterm population. We're really excited to see that in the context of fetal growth restriction, in the final component of my PhD, we saw this umbilical cord blood stem cells being able to repair neuronal complexity. This was really novel, and we want to understand this further. And with your funding, we're able to take this work and really understand the mechanisms that are driving this neuronal repair and how that impacts on learning and memory, so that we can then take this treatment into clinical translation in the future. It's a huge opportunity to be able to take the funding that you've worked so hard to raise and be able to take the first steps in my career as a young scientist, just starting out post her PhD, and being able to hopefully improve outcomes for babies born to fetal growth restriction and improve their outcomes later in life. I'll now throw back to Suzie.
I also want to point out that, as I mentioned, this is Tegan's first project outside of her PhD, and supporting our next generation of young biomedical scientists is really important. So a huge thank you for supporting Tegan as she takes the next step in her work.
My name is Taylor Penny. I was funded by an inner wheel grant a few years ago, and I would have met a lot of you at the conference in New South Wales. I just want to thank you for that and also for the continued support of us here at the Ritchie Centre and all that you do in your fundraising endeavours. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Inner Wheel. My name is Atul Malhotra. I'm a clinician in the neonatal unit at Monash Children's Hospital. Because of your generosity and the work you have supported at Hudson, we have been able to move the work of cord blood cell therapies into the clinic at Monash Children's Hospital. Along with the help of my PhD students Abdul Razak and Lindsay Zhao, we are running clinical trials, world-first clinical trials, helping those babies with brain injuries have those cell therapies. Thank you so much for your support.
Hi, I'm Emily Cam. Thank you, Inner Wheel, for your continued support from the team here at the Ritchie Centre at the Hudson Institute.
Hello, my name is Graham Jenkin. I was fortunate enough in 2012 to receive the first Inner Wheel Foundation grant to study the use of umbilical cord blood in the treatment of neonates with brain injury. Since then, we've moved on to undertake the world first clinical trials in the use of umbilical cord blood for the treatment of very premature babies. This work just would not have been possible without the continued support of the Inner Wheel Foundation, who have done a fantastic job fundraising for our research and our clinical translation. The continuing support of Inner Wheel Foundation has allowed me to reach my dreams and also to assist women with very premature babies in protecting their delicate brains. Thank you so much, Inner Wheel Foundation.